On a winter night in 39 Anno Domini, Rome did not freeze because the wind was sharp. Rome froze because every patrician street understood the sound of armored footsteps. When that sound rolled down stone like thunder in a tunnel, families did not ask who was coming. They asked whose daughter would be missing by morning. Imagine being 14 years old, already in your night clothes, half awake, thinking the street outside your window is calm until the rhythm starts. Metal on stone, measured, confident, unhurried. It stops outside your door, and in that pause, your house feels smaller than it has ever felt. You were raised to believe an imperial summons is a privilege. No one warned you it can arrive like a raid. No one warned you guards would cross your threshold as if your home already belongs to the Palatine. And no one warned you about the lantern, a lantern covered in red cloth, the kind that turns light into a signal. They set it in front of your door so the neighborhood learns a rule that keeps people alive. Do not look too long, do not ask too loud, do not remember too clearly. In a few minutes, you will hear your mother whisper your name, like a prayer she is afraid to finish. In a few minutes, your father will force a smile he cannot hold, because he knows the truth. Rome pretends not to know. Refusal is treason, obedience is surrender, and both can get you killed. A herald produces a scroll sealed in imperial purple, and the color alone feels like a hand around the throat. The words inside are polite, almost graceful, because power does not need to shout. It simply expects, send your daughter. Not any daughter. The most politically valuable one, the most admired, the one whose beauty can be converted into leverage. Families call it an honor, the way people call a storm weather. They do it to survive. The guards wait, patient as a guillotine. Your father reads. Your mother's eyes do not blink. You realize, suddenly, that your life is no longer being decided by love or law, but by appetite. Remember one name, Flavia. In this story, she is the face we follow, not because she is the only victim, but because she is the kind Rome would normally protect: noble blood, respected family, the illusion of safety. And if you think Flavia's nightmare begins at the door, understand this: the door is mercy compared to what waits inside. Rome called it the Garden of Venus, beautiful words, masking a brutal purpose. Ancient sources hint at things so degrading that later generations preferred to laugh at Caligula's madness rather than stare straight at the machinery of his cruelty. What you are about to hear is not only about one emperor. It is about what happens when a society hands one man the right to claim anything he wants and teaches everyone else to call it tradition. Caligula did not materialize out of nowhere like a lightning strike. He was born into glory, the son of Germanicus, Rome's golden general, the kind of man who could quiet a legion with a glance and make a city roar by simply arriving. Caligula should have inherited honor and stability. Instead, he grew up on the empire's frontier, in military camps soaked in sweat, iron, and the metallic breath of war. He learned to walk between hardened soldiers, the ground vibrating with the stomp of hobnailed sandals. The legionaries adored the general's child, dressed in miniature gear, and called him Caligula Little Boot. It sounded affectionate. It also welded him to the identity of a mascot for power. Even as a boy, he watched how men changed when command entered their voice. The frontier taught him its first rule early. Power is not inherited like a family heirloom. Power is taken. And once you take it, you do not ask forgiveness for how you use it. Then the world cracked. Germanicus died under suspicious circumstances, and overnight the adored child became a target. Caligula watched his mother and brothers get exiled, imprisoned, and eliminated one by one, not by an invading army, not by barbarians, but by Rome's own cold internal will under Emperor Tiberius. It is one thing to learn that death exists. It is another thing to learn that death can be paperwork. The boy discovered a second rule. Innocence is not armor when the wrong man is in control. And then came Capri, the island where Rome liked to imagine Tiberius retired, as if monsters retire. Capri was not peace. Capri was a gilded coffin sealed with paranoia. For years, Caligula survived under the gaze of an emperor who trusted no one and punished on a whim. There, the boy learned how to live with a smile that was not a smile. On Capri, he learned the darkest rule of all. To survive, you must perform. You must laugh at the jokes of the man you hate. You must bow with a steady face while rage burns behind your teeth. You must become two people, the harmless figure others see, and the private self that grows colder with every humiliation swallowed. Hold that image, because when Tiberius dies and the Senate raises Caligula onto the throne in 37, Anno Domini, Rome celebrates a savior. The city does not realize it has crowned a man trained by trauma to treat life like theater, and trained by power to believe the stage belongs to him. At first, Caligula plays the role Rome desperately wants. He frees prisoners, he burns the records of informers, he cuts hated taxes, he throws games, feasts, and public generosity like coins to a starving crowd. Rome erupts in relief. The son of Germanicus has arrived, they tell themselves, to cleanse the rot. But performance is not transformation. The same mind that learned to survive by acting can also learn to rule by acting, and acting can hide rot for only so long. Near the end of that first year, a violent illness strikes. The emperor hovers between life and death, and the entire empire holds its breath because it has already tasted the panic of succession. When he rises from that bed, something vital does not rise with him. The man returns, but the restraint does not. After the illness, the mask stays on, yet the face beneath it changes. Standing atop the Palatine, staring down at a city that worships him, Caligula grasps a terrible truth. At the peak of absolute power, there are no gods above you, only victims below. The Senate's trembling silence does not humble him, it confirms him. The crowd's cheers do not ground him, they intoxicate him. His generosity twists into spectacle, his justice curdles into cruelty. And then a new idea hardens in his mind, an idea that is less about desire and more about domination. Noble women are not citizens in his eyes. They are pressure points. They are instruments. If you want to break an elite class, you do not start by killing its men. You start by proving its men cannot protect their daughters. This is how Flavia's story becomes inevitable. Because once Caligula decides women are the easiest way to force obedience, the city's marble mansions become cages with pretty walls. The knock begins to spread across Rome, street by street, villa by villa. Scrolls arrive sealed in purple. Lanterns covered in red cloth appear like quiet curses, and every household learns the same lesson. The emperor does not need to conquer your home. He simply needs to desire it. The next step is where Rome's fear becomes organized into a system, one that does not only punish bodies, but rewires minds. And when terror becomes routine, it becomes almost impossible to stop. The summons starts politely. That is what makes it lethal. Heralds arrive not with drawn blades, but with sealed scrolls, and the families receiving them understand the cruelty of Roman politics. Violence does not always arrive screaming. Sometimes it arrives dressed like ceremony. Send your daughter, the order implies, and call it an honor. Families call it a privilege, because the alternative is extinction. Fathers practice smiles in mirrors, like men preparing for their own execution. Mothers rehearse calm voices while their hands shake behind their backs. The girls are escorted through palace corridors into a secluded wing. Caligula names with cruel irony, the Garden of Venus. The name suggests softness, romance, beauty. The reality is a trap built from silk and silence. Inside are pink marble walls, scented oils, and servants who move like shadows, anticipating every need with a speed that feels unnatural. The daughters of Rome step across the threshold, believing they still have control, believing this is sacred service, courtly honor, a strange but manageable duty. Then the truth begins to leak in, drop by drop, the way poison leaks into water. Paradise is only decoration. The prison is everything beneath it. The gifts they are made to wear are not gifts. They are signals of ownership, heavy gold that reminds the body it has been claimed. The garments are designed not to protect dignity, but to strip it. The first thing Caligula attacks is identity, because identity is how a person remembers they are human. Real names are dangerous. Real names create a past, and a past creates resistance. So he replaces names with mockery. Numbers, jokes, humiliating nicknames whispered like a private joke that everyone is forced to laugh at. The girls learn quickly that the garden is not meant to break them fast. It is meant to break them slowly enough that they understand every step of their undoing. The most efficient weapon here is not a whip. It is waiting. They do not know when they will be summoned. Tonight, tomorrow, weeks from now. Every hour becomes an execution by anticipation. Footsteps in a hallway make hearts race. A sudden knock turns breath into panic. Sleep becomes impossible because dreams become rehearsals for terror. By the time Caligula chooses a girl, the psychological damage is already deep, and that is the point. Fear makes compliance cheaper than force. Keep that in mind, because the next layer is even more disgusting. He does not only want victims, he wants witnesses. He wants fathers, uncles, fiancés, and senators to sit in the same room and learn what power truly means. The summons does not always lead to a private chamber. Sometimes it leads to a banquet, to a public theater disguised as celebration. The girls are paraded before Rome's elite like living trophies, displayed among laughing men who are terrified of showing discomfort. Caligula walks among them with the casual arrogance of someone choosing fruit at a market, commenting loudly, ranking, praising, insulting, turning human beings into entertainment. The cruelty is not only in what he says, it is in what everyone else does not say. Fathers sit at tables of honor, forced to nod as if this humiliation is harmless. Uncles stare at goblets as if staring at wine can erase what is happening. Fiancés swallow their rage because a flicker of disgust could condemn the girl and the family. That silence becomes a second assault. It teaches the victims that even the men who love them are powerless in the face of a crown. Ancient writers, men like Suetonius and Cassius Dio, describe Caligula's reign with stories that can feel unbelievable, even exaggerated. Some details may be colored by politics and scandal, but across the accounts, a consistent theme emerges. Caligula used sexuality and humiliation as weapons of state, and he seemed to take special pleasure in forcing the elite to participate through their fear. That is the key. Shared guilt is the strongest leash. When powerful men are made complicit, they become invested in silence. Caligula does not merely violate boundaries. He engineers a social trap where speaking the truth becomes self-destruction. The Garden of Venus, whether exactly as described or reconstructed through rumor and testimony, represents that larger mechanism. A controlled system that makes victims feel isolated and makes witnesses feel trapped. And then he destroys solidarity among the girls themselves. He ranks them, rewards some with temporary favor, punishes others, turns them into rivals, fighting for scraps of safety. Unity dies, because unity is dangerous. When unity dies, the emperor owns everything. The girl who tries to disappear learns invisibility can be punished. The girl who tries to stand out learns attention can be fatal. Every choice is a trap. And when Caligula grows bored, he does not simply release a girl back into life as if nothing happened. He makes sure the damage follows her home like a shadow, because the next stage of this horror is not only what happens inside the palace, it is what happens after, when Rome pretends the victims should be grateful. By 40 Anno Domini and into 41 Anno Domini, the palace atmosphere turns toxic enough to suffocate. The girls who arrived with bright eyes become quiet phantoms. Some stop speaking entirely. Some float through corridors, like their bodies are moving and their minds are somewhere else, hiding in the last place Caligula cannot easily reach. Trauma does that. It pulls a person inward when the outside becomes unbearable. Servants whisper about breakdowns, about girls who cannot sleep, about trembling hands, about sudden panic at the sound of sandals. And then come the rumors Rome least wants to acknowledge: suicides. Not romanticized, not dramatic, just desperate attempts at escape. A life in the garden is not a life of living. It is a life of being held, watched, summoned, reshaped. For some victims, death begins to look like the only door that still belongs to them. Caligula's cruelty evolves. He learns that pain can be inflicted through families. He allows parents to visit, not to rescue, but to perform. Girls are washed, perfumed, dressed in expensive fabric to hide visible damage. They are forced to smile, forced to act, forced to say they are honored because the guards are listening. Parents must pretend this is celebration, because if a mother's voice breaks, the family can be punished. If a father shows anger, he can be destroyed. Everyone becomes an actor in a theater of denial. This is how tyranny spreads. It makes truth too expensive to speak. And once truth becomes expensive, lies become survival. Rome does not only lose its daughters in this system, Rome loses its backbone. Then Caligula makes the mistake every tyrant eventually makes. He starts humiliating the men with swords. He mocks senators openly. He degrades commanders. He turns military honor into a joke. He pushes the Praetorian Guard, the very force meant to protect the emperor, into a corner of rage and shame. Cassius Chaerea, an officer hardened by war, becomes a focal point, especially after repeated humiliation. In many accounts, Caligula's taunts are relentless, designed to make a man feel small in front of his own peers. Tyrants believe humiliation is harmless because it leaves no blood on the floor. They forget humiliation accumulates like gunpowder. And now the fuse is lit, and the next corridor Caligula walks through will be the last one he ever walks through alive. In January of 41 Anno Domini, during the Palatine Games, Caligula moves through a private passageway known as the Crypto Porticus. He walks like a man convinced he is untouchable. That is the strange thing about absolute power. It can make a mortal feel immortal right up until the second steel enters flesh. Chaerea and conspirators block his path. Ancient accounts differ in details, but the arc is brutally consistent. There is no fair trial, no honorable duel, no warning that allows the emperor to transform into a hero. There is only the sudden collapse of a myth. A first strike cuts the illusion. More blows follow. The man who demanded worship bleeds like any other man. The city that once cheered now holds its breath again, not from hope, but from shock. Caligula dies not as a god, but as proof that gods can be dragged down by the hands of men they insulted for too long. Inside the palace, chaos spreads like fire. Caligula's Germanic bodyguards, discovering their emperor dead, lash out in blind fury. Corridors become killing lanes, servants die, officials run. Anyone unlucky enough to be in the wrong place at the wrong moment becomes a target. For the young women held in the garden, the noise is confusing and terrifying. Screams, rushing feet, shouted commands, the clash of weapons. They huddle in corners, shaking, because after years of conditioning, they no longer trust any sudden change to mean salvation. When the world you know is cruelty, even freedom can feel like another trick. The silence that follows does not feel peaceful. It feels unfamiliar, and unfamiliar is dangerous. Then comes the political response, and it is colder than a blade. Claudius, Caligula's uncle, emerges as the next emperor pulled from hiding, elevated by necessity, surrounded by men who want stability more than justice. Claudius faces a reality every regime faces after scandal. If the full truth becomes public, it could crack the state itself. So Rome does what Rome often does. It buries, it pays, it rewrites. Survivors are returned to families with wealth, fabrics, and dowries heavy enough to silence questions. The money is not generosity. It is a muzzle, Forget it says without saying. Forget what happened. Forget who watched. Forget who obeyed. Forget the way Rome fed its own daughters to preserve the illusion of order. And now, the story turns to the part Rome never wanted told: the aftermath, when victims are free but are not truly alive. The girls who come home are not the girls who left. They return to marble villas carrying the weight of a palace that tried to turn them into props. Some cannot tolerate touch. Some cannot sleep without jolting awake. Some flinch at footsteps because footsteps used to mean summons. Some stare at walls for hours, not because they are empty, but because their minds learned to survive by leaving the room while the body stayed. In Roman society, a noble woman's value is tied to purity, and that cruel social logic ensures victims are treated like stains instead of survivors. Families hide them away to protect honor, as if honor matters more than a human being's ability to breathe without panic. Rome whispers. Rome judges. Rome pretends the girls should be grateful for the wealth that came with their silence. The city does not call them victims loudly, because loud truth would force Rome to admit the rot was never only in Caligula. It was in the system that let one man turn terror into policy. This is why the phrase "worse than death" lands so hard. Death and suffering. Caligula's kind of cruelty, as preserved in ancient accounts and echoed in the patterns of tyranny across history, stretches suffering into a life sentence fear that follows you into old age, humiliation that clings to your name, silence that steals your right to tell your own story. Whether every detail of the Garden of Venus occurred exactly as later writers describe, or whether parts were shaped by rumor, the broader truth remains. Caligula's reign became a symbol of what happens when unchecked power turns bodies into instruments and turns society into accomplice through fear. And if you think that lesson belongs only to Rome, ask yourself why tyrants in every era always attack the vulnerable first. It is not because the vulnerable are the threat. It is because hurting them is the fastest way to teach everyone else obedience. So here is the ending. Rome refused to give these women acknowledgement. If this story unsettled you, good. Let it unsettle you. If it made you angry, keep that anger aimed at the real target. Systems that reward silence and punish truth. Drop a like if you want more hidden history told without flinching. Subscribe so you do not miss the next story. And share this with someone who still thinks absolute power is just a phrase in a textbook. And I want you to leave one comment that proves you were here. Tell me where you are watching from. And answer this: when a society forces families to call terror a privilege, how many Flavias does it take before the silence finally becomes the real crime?